Hey guys, and welcome to this edition of Scruff's Garage. So, I just finished installing some max jacks in my detached garage, and while it's on my mind, I thought I would give you some tips, some decision points that you'll have to make as you're installing these. This is not going to be an installation video. Honestly, these things show up like 90% pre-assembled, and the rest of the installation is pretty straightforward. The only maybe challenging bit is drilling and setting the concrete anchors, and I've got a separate video just dedicated to talking about that. So for this video, a couple of tips. So number one, you're going to have to decide where you're going to buy them from and how you're going to get them home. So you can buy straight from Max Jacks, and every so often around major holidays they typically put them on sale, $500 off, something like that. But my observation, check out Lowe's and Home Depot. To me, it seemed like their day-to-day price was the same or a little less than the sale price when buying direct from Max Jack. And then as I started watching it, because I wasn't necessarily in a hurry to buy them, one day I noticed that Lowe's had them on sale for an even more discounted price. And then I bought them using my Lowe's card, which got me another 5% off. So at the end of the day, I think that was the best price I was going to be able to find on them, and I decided just to go ahead and pull the trigger. So just give you something to think about. Don't assume that your only option is buying them directly from Max Jack. The other decision you have to make is how to get them home. So if you buy them from, say, from Lowe's, they'll ship them for free to your local Lowe's store, and then you could go with the trailer and they'll load it typically with a forklift onto your trailer for you. But then when you get it home, you've got to figure out how to get it off the trailer and into your garage. So instead, what I did, I paid an extra $79 for their home delivery option. And let me tell you, that was money well spent. So they showed up with one of the flatbed trucks with the forklift that hangs off the back, like they would deliver building materials. Parked out in the street, unloaded the forklift, used that to pick up the crate, brought it up my driveway, and then I had two of the little wooden moving dollies like you buy from Harbor Freight. I had the forklift driver just set the crate down on the moving dollies, and then I could wheel it into the garage. And it allowed me to move it around the garage a little bit because I wasn't able to unpack the crate right away, so it gave me some flexibility. So using their home delivery and having them bring it up the driveway with a forklift, and that was money well spent. So that's an option for you if you're trying to figure out where to buy it from and how to get it home. Now the next decision point you have to make is where to position the columns in your garage. Now obviously the depth of your garage is going to be a little different than mine. My garage is 32 foot deep, so I set them a little bit more towards the center of the garage so that I had plenty of length for whatever length vehicle that I wanted to lift. Probably the more challenging bit is deciding how wide to space out the columns. Now, according to their instructions, they say you can space them anywhere from 105 to 135 inches apart, and that's from the outside of the column base to the outside of the other column base. Now, no, your first thought is, we'll just go as wide as possible because that will give you more room for opening the doors, and if you need to bring in a wide vehicle, so easy peasy. It is not quite that simple of a decision. You really need to look at what vehicles you intend to lift with these jacks and make sure you'll be able to get the arms to the lifting points. So a couple of things to think about. Number one thing is the vehicle I'm going to lift, does it have a frame or am I lifting from the pinch seam? Vehicles with a frame, those lifting points are typically more inboard to the vehicle versus a pinch seam that's typically more further out on the vehicle. And then think about the length of the wheelbase. So for example, I have a Jeep Gladiator that uses a frame so the lifting points are more inboard, but it's a longer wheelbase, so those lifting points are further apart. So in that scenario, the arms are fully extended to reach the frame and they're very wide apart. So if you go too wide on your column spacing, you may not be able to reach your desired lifting points on a vehicle like that. Now the flip side, if you go too narrow with your column spacing, if you're lifting a vehicle, say something like a Miata, so shorter wheelbase and a pinch seam for your lifting points. So then you could end up with a scenario where your lift arms, right, they're angled more inward. You may not be able to get them short enough to reach those lifting points. So I would recommend, I've got 3 vehicles, I pulled all 3 in before I drilled and set my concrete anchors. I just rolled the columns into place and I put the arms on it. And then I brought my vehicles in and swung the arms and make sure they could extend and hit the lifting points on the vehicles that I have. So at the end of the day, what I decided on was 128 inches of column spacing. It seems like the most common is somewhere between 126 and 130. I settled on 128 to kind of split it in the middle. And like I said, for everything from my TJ to my Gladiator to my wife has an Acura RDX, I think 128 inches will work okay. Now, if you're watching this video at some point in the future, as I buy and lift additional vehicles, if I find anything that it doesn't work for, I'll update the episode notes or put it down in the comment somewhere if 128 inches for some reason hasn't worked out for something. So if you're watching in the future, check the notes. Another decision that you have to make is where do you plan to mount your power unit and how do you want to route your lines? So obviously the max jacks are designed so that in theory they're portable. You could unbolt them from the floor. They have the little wheels on the back. You could move the columns around. And so they give you a cart that you can mount the power unit and the reservoir on. For my usage, I'm using these as a fairly permanent type of installation. So I mounted the power unit and the little divider block here on the wall. I made a little wall mount. So I didn't want my hoses running across the floor. I wanted to route one of the lines up in the ceiling and then it comes down over here. So to do that, max jacks give you two like 15-foot hoses. What I did is I joined those two together so that essentially makes a 30-foot hose, and I routed it. You can see I used a coupler up there, and it routes up and over and comes down to this column over here. And then I bought a separate hose. This is a 6-foot hose to go to this column on this side. I bought this hose on Amazon, though you could go to a local hydraulic type shop and they can make you a custom line if you needed to. To me, it was simpler just to order this on Amazon. This was the Apache brand, but when I got it, the hose is actually the Gates Pro Series hose. So it's pretty good hose. If you ask Max Jack, so if you call and you ask them about it, or if you look in their instructions, they'll tell you that the hoses essentially need to be the same length or within 5% of the same length. Obviously, I have one hose that is basically 30 foot long and another hose that's only 6 foot long. They caution you that you may end up with uneven lifting between the columns. But from what I've read and what I've experienced, now that I have everything set up and functioning, once the lines are filled with fluid and you've got all the air out of the system, at that point, the columns still lift evenly. Once it applies pressure, it's even pressure to both sides of the line, and it's a hydraulic system, and so I have found the columns lift evenly. And from what I've read, other people have experienced the same thing. So this seems to be working out pretty well for me. Though obviously this is outside of the recommendations that Max Jack would give you, but I just didn't want 30 foot of line coiled up over here on the floor. As you're bleeding the system and filling for the first time, they did lift unevenly. but don't be too concerned about that as you go through the bleeding process. They'll even out once you're done. And then as a final tip, and really this is a lesson from my big failure, there are a lot of NPT fittings on here. So they tell you that you need to use, with NPT fittings, you need to use some type of thread sealant. They provide for you some thread sealant in the kit, but I had read some negative reviews on this, so I decided to use this Permatex thread sealant with PTFE. I already had this, so I was like, all right, this stuff is pretty good. I'll use that instead. And I even let it set and cure for 24 to 48 hours on the fittings before I put fluid in the system. Oh man, what a failure that was. Every single fitting that I had thread sealant on leaked, and in a major way. I mean, it created a huge mess. And I wasn't even lifting a vehicle. This was just the very first turning on the pump and putting fluid into the lines. Every single fitting leaked. So I had to clean all that up, had to take everything apart, which to get down here in the base, that fitting screws into the hydraulic cylinder. To get that out, you have to unbolt this from the floor, tip it over, slide the lifting head up, and then you can get the hydraulic cylinder out. So that was a major pain in the butt. So my big suggestion to you is just use the thread sealant that they give you, because that's what I ended up using afterwards, and it worked out perfectly. They haven't leaked at all since then. So, you know, surprise, surprise, use the product that they tell you to use, and you won't have a problem. The one benefit to that, once I took everything apart the second time, I decided that for the column that's over here, this fitting down here is normally a 45-degree fitting. You can kind of see how that looks over here, and it kind of angles the line out like that. But since this is in the middle of my shop and it's just running straight up to the ceiling, I went to Tractor Supply and got a 90-degree hydraulic fitting instead. And so that it just keeps this line tucked up to the column a little cleaner, so it's not sticking out into the shop. So if you have a need to do that, check somewhere like Tractor Supply, and you can probably find the hydraulic fitting to do that sort of thing. Okay, there you go. So that's a few tips and suggestions as you're planning your project. If you're going to buy and install some max jacks, where to get them from, the decision you'll have to make about column spacing and how to route your lines and setting those up. I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions that I can answer, feel free to post them in the comments. If you have questions or interested about drilling and setting the concrete anchors, that's sort of a whole conversation to itself. So make sure you check out the video that I've done that's specific to that, and I think you'll find it equally as helpful. As always, thanks for tuning in to this edition of Scruff's Garage. I'll see you next time.